Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Unlocking the Potential of Digital Therapeutics. My name is Mark Haglin, and I'm Editor-in-Chief of Healthcare Innovation. Today's program is sponsored by Avia. Thank you so much to our friends at Avia and to you in our audience for giving us your time and attention today. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping details to share. To submit a question, please use the Q&A box to the left of your video window at any time. You do not need to wait until the end of the program. For technical issues, please press F5 to refresh, and if that doesn't work, you can submit a question with your issue through the Q&A panel. Finally, join our webinar conversation on Twitter. You can tweet using the hashtag HILiveWebinar. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome our presenters for today's program, all from Avia. Sarah Carroll is Vice President in the Center for Care Transformation at Avia. Amberly Dietz is a Director at Avia under the Center for Care Transformation with a focus on precision medicine. And Antara Sarkar is a Manager at Avia under the Center for Care Transformation. I'm going to have each one of these speakers very briefly introduce herself and her connection to this topic. Sarah, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We're delighted to be with you today. As Mark mentioned, I'm Sarah, and I've grown up in this space with a focus on kind of Gen 1 or first-gen digital solutions such as remote monitoring. I'm really fascinated by the shift in interest to digital therapeutics as we think about more use cases in delivering care at home. Over to you, Amberly.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Mark. It's great to be with everyone today. As Mark mentioned, my name is Amberly. I focus on our precision medicine practice development here at Avia with a background in leading clinical research as well as population genomics. Really excited about digital therapeutics as we think about the real world evidence and the outcomes that we see with these types of technologies. Antara, over to you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Hi all, my name is Antara Sarkar. Here at Avia, I work with a number of our health system partners on how they're looking to address problems in the behavioral health and mental health space, both in the adult and pediatric space, which has its own nuance, specifically helping our health system members think through challenges they're facing as it relates to quality of behavioral and mental health care, access to care, and coordination and efficiency of that care as well. So to no one's surprise, digital therapeutics kind of has been bubbling to the top and is a hot and budding topic in this space. Everywhere, but also specifically within the solution landscape of behavioral and mental health as it's gaining a little bit more traction. So excited to dive in a little bit deeper today to provide that behavioral health and mental health lens and perspective to that discussion.
Thank you so much. It's great to have all of you here, and I love that you come from diverse backgrounds, even representing the same organization. So that's great. So let's start at the very beginning. How do we define digital therapeutics? Everyone's heard of it. My guess is if you force 10 healthcare people into a room and then demanded that they define it, you'd get a lot of stammering.
Yes.
It's like art and obscenity. They know it when they see it, but they can't define it. Sarah, do you want to start?
Actually, I'm going to toss the ball to Amberly. I feel that she's really crystallized the definition for Avia most acutely.
Great.
Yeah. Let's start with the industry definition. And Mark, you're absolutely right. I think even all of us probably have a different definition for it as well. But the industry definition, as we think about digital therapeutics as a digital capability, really sits underneath the umbrella for digital medicine. And as Sarah mentioned, remote patient monitoring, really kind of underneath that umbrella. I think what differentiates digital therapeutics is really defining it as evidence-based, clinically validated software that has an application to treat, manage, and prevent a broad spectrum of diseases that we'll get into today that can ultimately help improve health outcomes. I think in the history of medicine, as we look all the way back 1,000 years ago, or even before that, Just look at willow bark. It was used by indigenous people to treat headaches. And so now we know of as willow bark as aspirin produced by Bayer to treat headaches as well, and other use cases as well. And so as our lives are moving more and more online, the need for on-premise services has really started to decline. And I think we all saw that happening in 2020, and it's rapidly changing, as well as a lot of us are still working from home. But as we look at other industries and traditional services being disrupted, when was the last time that we went into a bank to open an account or deposit a check? I think my niece probably doesn't know how to write a check, but that's just indicative of how this space is evolving. But digital therapeutics, they have been around over the last decade, and I think the definition has changed over time. The regulations are becoming more and more of a thing that we'll talk about today as well. But we are starting to see the evidence and these applications being used in the real world, and in tandem with that, with traditional therapies as well. And so they can be used independently or complement other existing medications, or they could be a replacement for other therapies. The Digital Therapeutics Alliance actually defines these different categories and applications as well. I think the one point that we'll talk about today, and an important distinction with digital therapeutics, you'll hear us talk about FDA approved and that importance, because there are a lot of solution companies in this space, but there are about 40 that we know of, and the sources are very different depending on what you find. About 40 that are FDA regulated as a medical device. And one of the things as you look at the FDA regulations and how the FDA defines and regulates this, it's really underneath software as a medical device category. And so a lot of these digital therapeutics are going to be thought of in that way as well. And so it's really important to think about that and the perspective of regulators as you look at these different technologies for digital therapeutics.
Wonderful. Before we move on to the next question, would either of the other two of you want to add anything to that statement? You feel good? Okay. So how then do digital therapeutics differ from other digital health systems and solutions on the market today? Help us understand that, and who do I turn to for that?
I'm happy to take that and just follow up on what Amberly mentioned. So there's really a pretty clear distinction that's emerging between digital therapeutics and the rest of what's out there in terms of digital health technologies that are in the market. So from the behavioral health perspective, it's just kind of my wheelhouse. Digital therapeutics differ from the multitude of what you'll see mental health and wellness apps that are on the market, because digital therapeutics are actually meant to be prescribed or recommended by a healthcare professional. So that's why you'll see, as Amberly mentioned and touched on just a little bit, some of these companies, and as the space is evolving, they will actually coin their products as prescription digital therapeutics to really reflect that and set themselves apart from those wellness apps that are out there on the market. These digital therapeutics are also part of a comprehensive treatment plan. They're evidence-based, and we'll get into that as well. And they're really subject to the same regulatory requirements as traditional medical treatments. So digital therapeutics actually take a course of approval that's closer to the research and development course for drug development, as opposed to those other mental wellness apps that are out there, because they don't need to be reviewed or approved by regulatory bodies such as the FDA, because they don't fall within their purview or their area of enforcement authority. So again, in addition to that, digital therapeutics are also developed to target specific disease conditions, particularly chronic diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular conditions, COPD, et cetera. And they're different than traditional diagnostics or telehealth that we've seen. But I think Sarah Carroll can kind of go into that more chronic disease management part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Antara. So the way I think about digital therapeutics in relationship to remote monitoring is that these therapeutics are designed to be used by patients with greater independence from care team oversight and intervention. Remote monitoring platforms traditionally come with integrated peripherals or devices that are typically used for 2 to 12 months at a time, with more direct oversight from a member or members of a care team, whether that's primary care provider or specialist who's really continuously monitoring the patient to intervene as necessary. But digital therapeutics are designed to be used by the patient and mostly in an independent course of care, though, of course, originally prescribed by a clinician.
Thank you. That important distinction. How do digital therapeutics help address common strategic challenges such as patient engagement and workforce constraints? I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can take that one. So as we think about patient engagement and patient experience, we know that patients want to feel more connected and more empowered in their care. And so health systems are really trying to figure out, what does that really mean for patients, and how do we make sure that they can be empowered for their care? And so really thinking about that from a personalization standpoint. So looking at, even though from a generational or a cultural or environmental standpoint, it's important to meet patients where they are. And I think that's important for some of the digital therapeutics. As Antara mentioned, in the behavioral health space, they may want to do this in their own home. They may want to, really do it on their own time from a convenience standpoint. And so it's really important to really think about that experience from a strategic standpoint. So really taking a lot of these digital therapeutics that don't require that constant provider intervention because they are enabled by technology. How do we enable that N of one experience without having to overburden our resources in the healthcare system to really truly enable that N of one experience? And as we think about that from a motivation perspective, it's known that providing more personalized recommendations has been shown to increase adherence from a patient perspective because they are empowered and driven to kind of take care of themselves and whatever the care plan may say. And so it has been shown that, the shift from one size fits all to truly personalizing the approach can really help enable patient activation and promote that behavior change that we want to see, especially for some of these chronic conditions like diabetes and others that we'll talk about as well. And that ties into the workforce perspective as well, because as we think about, the nursing and provider shortages that we all know about, this can help expand and extend our caregivers' reach and also duplicate some of the efforts digitally. And what I mean by that is if, you can take care of 10 patients and have AI algorithms to help with the algorithm of care, we can have less resources to make sure that we can help our caregivers and help extend that. I think one important thing that I want to mention there, it's important that we don't just implement the technology, but we also look at it from a strategic standpoint and a programmatic standpoint. How do we look at these complex cases and make sure that the workflows and the care pathways are really redesigned with digital therapeutics in mind? And I think that's really where we see the navigation and the shift towards that value-based care, so that way we can see those health outcomes and we can also inevitably reduce the cost of that as well. And so it's really important to think about it from a strategic lens.
I think that's your explanation here has been so great, Amberly, because you're absolutely right. I mean, we're more burdened by shortages of team members than ever, especially nursing, as we all know, but others as well. And at the same time, consumers learned during the pandemic that they can be empowered and they can be much more involved, especially if it's in a remote situation than they have been in the management of their care. So I really appreciate that very much. How do we, what are the other reasons that health systems are starting to explore digital therapeutics as a natural extension of their care models? I think this is particularly interesting in light of how we're moving more and more into population health management and care management.
Exactly, Mark. In fact, I like to think about the potential here, really. And we called this webinar Unlocking the Potential because there's great, tremendous potential across different perspectives in a health system. So you mentioned population health, innovative minded, either chief medical officers or chief population health officers are going to have a bias to use digital therapeutics to improve the quality and improve clinical outcomes. They may also be able to demonstrate a competitive advantage against health systems who are, stuck relying on resource-heavy in-person care models or even first-gen digital solutions such as virtual visits. Another perspective that comes to mind is thinking about how a chief marketing officer might view the integration of digital therapeutics. They might want to explore digital therapeutics for its potential to increase patient satisfaction, to build loyalty, and create some stickiness for long-term growth initiatives. And then finally, I see great potential for health plan or ACO leaders who are intrigued by early evidence suggesting lower total cost of care through preventive utilization. So whether that's reducing the need for expensive surgeries or expensive drugs that could be avoided, or even preventing disease progression, or at least slowing disease progression through the use of digital therapeutics.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. And it all connects, right? Because the most advanced patient care organizations, including ACOs, already understand that very active patient engagement for patients with chronic illnesses is going to be absolutely key to moving everything forward. So you're going to improve outcomes, save money, achieve that stickiness, and do everything else all at the same time, and wash windows all at the same time by engaging in this kind of thing. Well, the last thing, maybe not wash windows. But so tell me a little bit how digital therapeutics vary in their use cases by different population and different clinical activity.
Yeah, I can take that one, Mark. So digital therapeutics really have a wide range of use cases that they cover for different populations, different clinical activities. My wheelhouse, behavioral health, also for chronic conditions, as Sarah mentioned, also for precision medicine, which is more of Amberly's wheelhouse, but other specialty use cases as well. So specific to behavioral health, digital therapeutics can be used to treat anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, substance use disorders, SUDs. And traditionally, when people come with mental or behavioral health conditions or disorders, there's really two ways we treat behavioral health conditions. We either provide some sort of therapy or we prescribe some type of medication. And now with digital therapeutics, it offers this third scalable option, right? Now the patient or the consumer has the ability to download a clinical grade app on their phone or their computer and rely on it as a viable treatment and a reliable piece of treatment, just as they would if they got that therapy or that pill or that medication. And so digital therapeutics, again, spreads across treatment for ADHD, depression, insomnia, or even specifically opioid use disorders. So as far as a couple of examples that are out there and some creative solutions, in terms of digital therapeutics, there are platforms out there that deliver cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT therapy, which is standard of care for depression, anxiety, sleep disorders, and addiction disorders as well. There are games through digital therapeutics that offer sensory and motor stimuli to address cognition for ADHD and depression that's been getting a lot of traction in the pediatric space. There are cognitive emotional tasks for improving outcomes for depression. There are apps that parents are using to support their children that have sleep disorders, ADHD, anxiety. So there's a lot of creative solutions that are out there, especially in the behavioral health space, that are getting traction. And I know Amberly mentioned this earlier, there's about 40 something FDA approved digital therapeutics that are out there. Again, with this evolving space, it's really how you define it and how it depends on that definition. But I think to date, according to a paper that was published in a psychiatry journal in 2022 for behavioral health, there's really only few clinically tested software devices that have been authorized by the FDA in the behavioral health space. And it's probably closer to 9 or 10, again, depending on how you define it. But in those examples is a product called Reset for substance use disorder. That's probably one of the more commonly known ones because it was kind of one of the ones that paved its way and was the first of its kind. That's by Pear Therapeutics. They also have a product that's Reset O, which is for opioid use disorder specifically as well. Also very popular. And then Endeavor RX, which is by a company called Akili Interactive, and they're supporting pediatric ADHD. So that more game approach. So the space is growing really rapidly, especially in the behavioral health space. But I'll actually push it over to Sarah to see if she has anything to add from the chronic care management perspective.
Yeah, I just love all those examples, Antara. I don't have quite as many, and I hinted at a few earlier, but really we're seeing some really awesome opportunities in chronic condition management. specifically related to diabetes, COPD, heart disease, asthma for kids or adults. And I name those conditions because they generally have high costs of treatment over a lifetime and are going to need some daily coaching and support for behavioral change.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is all very exciting. What core capabilities should one look for in therapeutics, digital therapeutics?
That's a great question. And as Antara mentioned earlier, there are so many different solution companies in this space today. And so I think as you think about what could this look like for my system and what are the different things that I should be looking at, I think there are a couple important ones. Patient-centered design, as we talked about earlier, different generations, environmental aspects make it really important to make sure that there are multimodal delivery options. So making sure that, if patients don't want to download an app, that's considered, but also thinking about different text capabilities and others, and making sure that it doesn't solely rely on Wi-Fi as we think about health equity. That's really important as digital therapeutics are being built. Another one that I think is really important, and it kind of goes back to what Antara and Sarah were talking about with the different use cases, is proven clinical utility and evidence. I think the difference between digital medicine and digital therapeutics, it really comes down to that real world evidence that has become so important for these types of technologies and the software applications. And that's what the FDA is looking for. So really thinking about what are the outcomes associated to these different types of applications? What are they saying, and what are the proven outcomes from a patient perspective? So if you get some of these solution companies knocking on your door, I would definitely make sure that that's a question for them. What are the case studies? What's the evidence that come to it? Because there's a lot of companies in this space, and it will be really important moving forward. Another one that I'd like to touch on is seamless integration with the health system. And this really ties back to workflows and adoption that will inevitably lead to scalability and the ongoing ability to demonstrate outcomes, because we want to make sure that the data collection is in real time and AI driven with coaching. And this really ties back to that workforce that we were talking about earlier as well, really making sure that the data from a health system lens flows back into the system and is seamlessly integrated into the workflows from a provider perspective. And again, what are the care pathways that are associated with these? How do we make sure that if we implement these different types of applications from a technology perspective, that we can support our patients with the workflows that are associated to this? And then also thinking about the connected and regulatory approved wearable devices, as Sarah touched on earlier with the remote patient monitoring, making sure that the data from those devices is easily integrated into the electronic health record, and also from a patient perspective that they're easily able to use from patients as well. And then lastly, from integration and interoperability from the data collection, we want to make sure that it is accessible for patients and providers for the workflow to make sure that we can truly see those outcomes.
Wonderful. And that leads to my next question, which is, what are best practices into integration, particularly into the EHR?
Yeah, CMIOs that we talk to are looking for four main aspects for seamless integration. First, the ability to document clinical, behavioral, social needs assessments in the patient record. Secondly, the ability to order and code in the EHR. So they want the digital therapeutics solution to easily populate the patient record, but they also want to activate orders and other actions in the EHR that flow back into the digital therapeutic solution. They want to be able to manage the care and enable billing according to payer contracts. We'll touch on payment in a moment, but I think that ability to bill is going to be important in these early days, even as we're moving from fee-for-service to fee-for-value environments. And then finally, the fourth success factor in EHR integration is the ability to aggregate data and evaluate population health, so that we're just not looking at the N of one, which is really essential for digital therapeutics, but we're thinking about how we can extrapolate results across the system.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Um, how, what are the different kinds of modalities that you're all seeing now in therapy?
Yeah,
Therapeutics?
we're seeing a choice of engagement mechanisms. So we're seeing digital therapeutics deployed with a smartphone app that may include written, spoken, or video content. Some solutions offer a pre-configured cellular-enabled tablet if home internet and device access is limited.
Anyone else want to add on that? Okay. So now here's an important question. How does one deliver the content of a care plan?
Yeah, I'll take this one too. We think about the ability to create customizable assessments to establish baseline clinical data and behaviors as core to developing a care plan. And then clinicians will want a library of solutions that include evidence-based medical and psychosocial intervention pathways. Patient engagement must be personalized, and to personalize education, it's important to create task lists or set goals and allow for progress checkpoints along the way. And then finally, we're seeing digital therapeutics offer virtual coaching with or without supervision from a human health coach or similar professional. And that really gives the ability to educate patients on how their behaviors are impacting their health and disease outcomes. I saw the most fascinating demonstration the other day of a physical therapy solution that had a connected peripheral that allowed the AI-driven health coach to coach me on how well I was performing a specific knee exercise, and I got reprimanded pretty early on in the session. But it was a gentle and kind coaching to straighten out my leg, move it more slowly, and I just felt that real-time feedback is absolutely critical and very difficult to deliver through in-person and often infrequent care.
I wonder if did the voice sound like the car directions lady? Now, you turned the wrong way.
I wish I could have changed the accent. It would have been fun to try an Australian accent on my physical therapy.
Great. So what are some real world examples of digital therapeutics in action and some of the results that they've achieved?
I can comment on that. Like I mentioned, through some of the examples that I listed previously, digital therapeutics have really been shown to effectively treat behavioral and mental health conditions and reduce the need for that medication. And so I think one of the most common and popular ones that you may have heard of, because it was one of the first approved therapies of its kind, is Reset. And that product was actually built by Therapeutics for the treatment of non-opioid use disorders. And then again, like I mentioned, Reset O is the product for treatment of opioid use disorders specifically. So in 2017, the Reset product by Therapeutics was granted a de novo clearance by the FDA. And de novo clearances are used for novel devices of low to moderate risk. And they're a little bit more onerous than the traditional 510K approvals for FDA for medical devices because, but once one of those products gets the clearance in one of those categories, it's easier for the subsequent products to get cleared just by nature of having repetition and experience in that space. So at the time in 2017 or 2018 when it got cleared, Reset was one of the first software-only digital therapeutics that the FDA had cleared with claims to improve clinical outcomes in disease. So both Reset and Reset O are instruments that require prescription and provide cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT therapy under a clinician supervision as sort of an adjunct to outpatient treatment. And so The Reset product itself is modeled under the community reinforcement approach, or CRA, which is a specific form of CBT therapy designed for patients with substance use disorders. And so this approach really uses and supports and incentivizes patients with substance use disorders in achieving abstinence and retention in their outpatient SUD treatment programs. It's a 12-week program. It's really designed to treat, again, addiction and dependency on stimulants like cocaine, alcohol, cannabis, et cetera. And the actual interventions and assessment tools for the patient are provided via a mobile health app. And then that actually collects the data that is collected and delivered to a clinician-facing dashboard. And so these two products, Reset and Reset O, have been studied in a number of randomized trials. And in one of the trials, the test group who received the therapeutic compared to the control group who did not, they saw that twice as many patients who had actually used the therapeutic were abstinent after 9 and 12 weeks. So they have some pretty promising clinical results. There was also another study that showed and evaluated changes in healthcare resource utilization and cost of care for a group of individuals who actually use the therapeutic as well. And they found in that study that actually the use of the therapeutic actually created significant reductions in use of acute care. So they found a reduction in hospital encounters by approximately 50%. Inpatient stays, approximately 56% were reduced, and even ED visits as well were reduced by approximately 45%. So really, these reductions in acute care drove that reduction in cost as well for these patients. So really promising results, but just to give you an example of a therapeutic with lots of clinical outcomes to support it and has been gaining traction recently. Sarah, did you want to provide an example based on kind of your experience in the chronic care management area?
Yeah, sure, Antara. And before I do, I just want to reflect on all the amazing outcomes that Antara described. This is the kind of evidence that is going to be so critical moving ahead as health systems are really facing some of the worst financial headwinds they've experienced in years, if not decades. And what we're hearing from the Avia network is that they have to be even more careful about making investments in digital solutions with these difficult headwinds. So as we continue to see the evolution to value-based care, I wouldn't be surprised if one opportunity is really for payers and providers to start to collaborate a little bit more on evidence-based digital therapeutics as a way to navigate these difficult financial headwinds.
Yeah.
But I digress. I did want to talk a little bit about Omada. Omada is a really fascinating story, and it's a reflection on the evolution in this field. So Omada now considers themselves to be an quote, digital care provider. But they, at one point in their life cycle, considered themselves to be a digital therapeutics company for diabetes, as most of you are probably familiar with. They now offer a fuller suite of products and services for multiple conditions, including diabetes, but also hypertension, anxiety, depression. And what's fascinating about them is because they were pioneers in this field, they achieved regulatory approval from the CDC, not from the FDA. And they did so as a virtual diabetes prevention program. So if you all have been following the evolution of the diabetes prevention program to virtual diabetes prevention program, you know that the CDC has been very closely involved in affording more of those virtual care options. But today, Omada offers software as well as clinical care too, which feels appropriate for them to call themselves a virtual digital care provider. They employ physicians, licensed clinical social workers, certified diabetes educators, and digital health coaches. And they currently serve employers and health plans, which is a tough pill to swallow for health systems because they've effectively carved care out from under the traditional health systems. We're seeing this more and more, which is why health systems in the Avia network have come to Avia to help them navigate some of these disruptors. Omada, as you all probably know, has been tested in numerous studies. In one clinically, a randomized controlled trial led by a Wake Forest researcher back in 2020, about 600 individuals were randomized to the Omada DPP program versus a single session diabetes prevention class in person. And Omada participants on average reduced their A1C at 12 months compared to the control group. They were able to keep that A1C reduced within a normal range 1 year, even after the end of the program compared to the comparison group. And they also achieved a greater average weight loss, including 1 year after enrollment. And so Omada is a fascinating case study for a variety of reasons. Not only do they have the clinical evidence to support their solution, but their evolution from digital therapeutics to a more holistic virtual care provider that includes human beings, and their place in value-based care and effectively carving out diabetes care from traditional health systems.
Interesting. And I just have to say, I'll just editorialize. I'm an editor. We can't help it. It's what we do. But I'll just say, Sarah, I think what you said a moment ago was so true. It would behoove providers involved in value-based, especially risk-based contracts, to collaborate with payers on this. Yeah. They don't want to be left behind. They want to be in the driver's seat, even if it's the co-driver's seat, right? You don't want someone else just doing all this and then saying, well, we don't really need you anymore. That would not be a good outcome. So there's great potential there. And I do see, by the way, just to let us all know, we have a few questions from the audience. So we'll try to hurry along just a little bit at the end here. Tell us, what are the biggest barriers to adoption right now? What is holding providers and others back from it?
Yeah, I can take this one. This is a fun one. If it were that easy, it would be widely adopted by now, but it's not. And I think it really comes down to three things. And this is, Sarah teed this up pretty nicely, but the first being the poor fit with existing payment mechanisms. I think traditional fee-for-service healthcare is organized around the use of codes, CPT codes, to compensate for provider time and effort, facility overhead, paying for the pharmaceuticals, devices, and DME or durable medical equipment. But digital therapeutics don't really fit neatly into any of those categories or squarely into any of them. And so they're really not a traditional pharmaceutical like an antidepressant drug, nor are they a device like an MRI. They're also not a durable piece of medical equipment like an insulin pump. They don't really take that much facility overhead. So even where there are existing provider CPT codes to cover the kinds of activities that digital therapeutics cover, the descriptions of the CPT codes may actually inadvertently exclude billing for digital therapeutics care. Mm-hmm. And so really faced with this dilemma where companies and private payers have negotiated some ad hoc arrangements, but there really is no consistent and standardized path for integration of digital therapeutics into reimbursement as of now. And so if they are, digital therapeutics, it comes with a couple of considerations, right? If digital therapeutics are reimbursed as a pharmaceutical, psychologists and social workers may not be able to prescribe behavioral health digital therapeutics. So there's a lot of considerations here, but really without a systematic pathway for integrating digital therapeutics into payment, the access to these digital therapeutics remains pretty uncertain. I think there's two other areas as well that are considered barriers. And it's tied to that first point that I just made, but also the lack of support from payers, in which we touched on very briefly. Medicare and Medicaid, they really don't offer much support or limited support for digital therapeutic products. If digital therapeutic products become kind of a critical part of the nation's strategy for addressing gaps in access, those who could actually potentially benefit from these digital therapeutics would actually end up might actually have the least access to these products. So there really is kind of a clear opportunity there for coverage from public payers who would promote stronger incentives for ensuring that those digital therapeutics actually meet the needs of the greater diversity of those individuals. And I think there's one last point that I want to touch on as well, aside from the payer and reimbursement, is the lack of provider training and uptake as well, just due to the sheer fact that they don't have that training in this space. I think in addition to these therapeutics requiring an overwhelming amount of real world evidence for providers to kind of have the confidence to actually use these solutions, they also have to fit into the physician's workflows. And currently providers just aren't well equipped to prescribe or support the use of digital therapeutics where appropriate, just granted that they haven't gotten this type of training before. And so while the process of prescribing a digital therapeutic product will eventually and hopefully be similar to that of traditional therapies once they're incorporated into EHRs and become standard of care, we're just not there yet. So I think really like meaningful provider education is necessary to integrate digital therapeutics into care delivery. So sort of 3 challenges that I would say.
That makes tremendous sense. Thank you so much, Antara. We do have a few questions from the audience, so I'll try to help us zip along just a little bit on the last 2 questions. How do digital therapeutics contribute to navigating towards value in healthcare? You partly already answered that, Antara, but whoever would like to add to that question.
I'll just quickly add to that, and we can make it quick so we can get to the questions from the audience. But I think as we think about the value equation for healthcare, quality, service, and access over cost, I think digital therapeutics can play a significant role. As we've discussed, it's relatively early in this space as we need more evidence and we need more value. But I think as we've all talked about, providers and payers collaborating to really determine what is the value of digital therapeutics and how can we really showcase that in a health economics outcomes research case study or publication, and really thinking about that from an ecosystem of healthcare overall. How do we make sure that we can really see that care cost reduction as well as outcomes? And so those really go into the goals of navigation to value for healthcare. Absolutely. Sarah, anything to add to that?
No, nothing for me, though. What I would say is if we, the 3 of us, had our crystal balls out and we could give you a glimpse into the future of digital therapeutics, I think what we'd say is that we expect to see continued growth in this space. We also anticipate increased regulatory oversight and hopefully, fingers crossed, a bit more guidance on the real definition. I see a great question that has popped into the chat that we'll get to in a moment about how do you really define digital therapeutics as it's evolving underneath our feet. But I think the real question that is yet to be resolved is what Antara and Amberly touched on, is the question around, can digital therapeutics companies take their clinical evidence and apply it to demonstrate lower overall costs in a real world environment?
Yeah, that makes tremendous sense. Thank you, Sarah. Did we want to ask a poll question before we come to our final?
We do. We are curious about the state of adoption across participants in this webinar. So if we could activate that poll, we'd love for the audience to let us know how advanced are you in thinking about adopting a digital therapeutic solution?
And I think we'll see from behind the scenes, something will appear.
Okay, it's been pushed out. Mark, while we're waiting on people to answer that question, do you mind if I just provide a closing remark before we turn? Okay. I think it's really important to note, and hopefully you've picked up from Antara, Amberly, and I, that while digital therapeutics have promise, it's really critical that we consider the clinical evidence and utility, the reimbursement challenges, put the user experience at the forefront, and consider technical integration and maintenance while vetting which solution may be right for an individual organization or service line. And as with everything we do and everything we advise our Avia clients on, it's important to start with the problem that you're trying to solve. Understand the potential use cases, think about organizational alignment, do all of that work before you go into solution evaluation. But when you do get to solution evaluation, you're trying to decide between different solutions in the same space. We do have a free tool that can help you, and that free tool is called the Avia Marketplace. Our marketplace helps organizations, healthcare organizations, understand the market landscape, the scope of the topic space, helps you easily compare apples to apples, not just in digital therapeutics, but the condition being addressed and what good looks like for the topic. This is standard work at Avia. This is work that Antara, Amberly, and I do every day when we're not offering webinars like this. We know how important it is that to trust the work being done, and the Avia Marketplace gathers existing clients, pulls reviews. We even add things in like FDA approvals where relevant, so you know you can count on the information being provided in the marketplace. And finally, back to the point of organizational alignment and readiness, you can easily share profiles and comparisons with what others who are using the Avia Marketplace. So think of the Avia Marketplace as LinkedIn for digital solutions in healthcare. That allows you to connect and network with others on your team as well as others across the country who are going through the same evaluation process.
Wonderful.
So now I'm dying to hear about any results on that poll, Mark.
Yes. Well, I'm going to push the results to the audience, and I just took a picture with my phone in case something bad happens. So here we go. Results sent. So what we found was that 42.31% have already started. 11.54% are starting this year. 11.54% are 1 to 2 years away, and 34.62% are not currently on the roadmap. What does all this say to you?
Well, these are fascinating data, and I'm so grateful to all of you who responded, because what it says to me, I'll start and then pass the baton to my teammates, is that many of you are relatively early on your journey, which doesn't surprise us. We are hearing from health systems across the Avia network, there's about 57 health systems in our network, that service line leaders are coming to the CMIO, the head of virtual care, and saying, hey, could you tell us a little bit more about this space? We are seeing some movement in our specific market, our region, and we really want to get smart. So that's how I interpret the data, is folks are looking to get smart. They've begun their own individual research, but they know that they have so much more to learn. Amberly, would you add anything else?
Sarah, I think that's great. I think it's really great to see that 40% of those of you have already started. And I think as Antara kind of went through some of the adoption challenges with reimbursement and some of the other things, I think I'll be curious to see how this space evolves over time with its definition. And we'll get into some of your questions that you have as well. But it's really great to see that 40% have already started. Antara, anything else to add?
Nothing to add.
Okay, great. Well, we had just enough time to kind of talk fast and ask the questions from the audience. The first question we partially answered, but there's a little addition to it. So the first question was, can you comment on the current state of affairs on the reimbursement vehicle for digital therapeutics by public or private payers? That we did address, but the participant is also asking about similarity or divergence to the DIGA model in Germany. Is anyone familiar enough with that to comment on that?
we've been watching the regulatory bodies from across the world. And I would say that my instinct is that Germany is noted to be an exceptional regulatory agency, and yet the FDA moves in mysterious ways. So I would spend more time paying attention to the FDA's moves than international moves. I feel as if we might see more movement from payers and providers collaborating to consider digital therapeutics as part of a formulary for prescribing, and that may accelerate the FDA's regulatory actions, just the open marketplace that the US affords. And typically that then leads to US government action once they have more data to back up that action. But, I'd look to my teammates if you have any other or different opinions.
No, Sarah,
oh, go ahead, Amberly.
I was just going to say that's exactly right. I definitely echo that. We're definitely seeing some movement in the payer market with partnering with these types of solutions. Also, employers deploying these types of solutions as well in order to gather that data that's needed for broader adoption and approval from FDA. Antara?
Yeah, just to touch on that formulary piece, I think I've heard, the Germany regulatory space has been lauded because they've kind of paved the way. But also seeing that it's actually pointed to low prescription numbers. Depending on your source, and low physician uptake as well. So I'll be curious to see kind of how that plays out, and kind of how we approach that, and the FDA works similarly or differently than how Germany has been. But
yeah, I actually saw a presentation on this at the HIMSS conference a year ago, and what I'll support what you said, Antara, in that. On the one hand, the German federal government has made a commitment to try to increase everything we're talking about. But they also have a weird set of laws so that inpatient and outpatient physicians aren't allowed to even talk. So I don't know how you square that, because if you can't bridge that, then where is this going? But I did see a presentation. The German federal government wants to move forward. So we'll see how they move forward. Okay, so another attendee says, can you please confirm my understanding? Digital therapeutics is more software therapeutic and not so much monitoring. Would you say that medical devices, pacemaker, insulin pump, etc., digital diagnostics, digital biomarkers, drug delivery devices, wearables, and remote patient monitoring are not digital therapeutics? Sorry, I had to take a breath in the middle of that.
It's a really, really smart question. And my answer is yes. Think of digital therapeutics as software centered, whereas remote monitoring solutions tend to have software, certainly, but also hardware included. That's specifically for connected platforms. Now, if you want to take another hour with me, I could describe other types of remote monitoring solutions that are non-connected or deviceless. A solution that comes to mind is Care Signal. But then I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, then there's another solution called Hinge Health. Perhaps that you picked up on the one that I was describing, where I was reprimanded by the AI coach for moving too fast. Hinge Health comes with software and the device, but I would anticipate most digital therapeutics, all digital therapeutics probably, are leading with software. And if they happen to have a device, a supporting device, that is considered peripheral, maybe not as essential. Antara, with her experience in behavioral health, is most suited to address this question, I think, because the behavioral health solutions are going to be software focused first. Isn't that correct, Antara?
Yeah, I would echo what Sarah said. They're really software forward. But yeah, no, nothing to add, Sarah.
Thank you.
The thing that I would add to that really quickly too, from a digital therapeutics standpoint, not all of them are going to require that hardware, to Sarah and Antara's point, because the behavioral health may be texting, it may be, playing a video game, whereas some of the others like Bioformus and others, who is known as the remote patient monitoring solution, but also has digital therapeutics. And so it's kind of that spectrum. So the way that we think about digital therapeutics is kind of that double click from digital medicine, which is remote patient monitoring, but the therapeutics is more the intervention. So the treatment, management, and improving in those categories for digital therapeutics.
So smart.
Great. We're not going to be able to get to everything, but let's get to 2 more questions if we can. Okay. People are writing long questions. I will try to do this without taking a breath, but we'll see. Speaking about evidence-based personalization, what are your thoughts on the challenge for clinical validation, since RCT approach is geared towards providing evidence on the population level rather than the individual level? I am wondering how the payers see this issue, as well as how does FDA approach evidence-based clinical validation and classification of digital therapeutic solutions?
I'll take that breath with you, Mark. That is a long question, but a great question. And I think, and I'll make it kind of quick, and if you have questions, please feel free to reach out after. But I think the difference here, as we think about clinical trials and digital therapeutics, even though they are personalized, we want to make sure that we're building them for the population. And so, and I think this is very similar to precision medicine and some of the actual therapeutics that are, medications that are being built. So they go through some of the same RCTs as well. And so I think the challenge is very similar as we think about precision medicine and digital therapeutics. So I would say, as we think about control trials, making sure that there is that, clinical endpoint that is really important. And as long as you're getting to that clinical endpoint, even though it's personalization, it should, you should see those outcomes. So that's my very quick answer, and hope that I answered that question. Sarah, Antara, anything to add to that?
Okay, thanks. I'm going to try to rush us through 2 questions, but we may not, we may go over a minute. So, this person asks, speaking about evidence-based personalization. Wait. Oh, that's what I just
this one, Mark.
Yes, I'm sorry. Here we go. Although not a digital therapeutic at all, we have proprietary / pre-authorization algorithms, initially MSK, that directly tie into well-established clinical evidence-based guidelines. The prior authorization link may well support at the front end what you've been discussing, including custom library, etc. This does not require EHR integration, however, can be. Patient-specific real-world data will also drive in an area we're strongly considering. Perhaps we can discuss offline. Dave Trotter, MD, President, Priori Health, Inc.
Not really a question, but
right.
There is an interesting question in are big pharmas investing in digital therapeutics?
Right.
Amberly probably has some thoughts there.
Yeah, I would say they're investing resources to actually developing digital therapeutics. And there's a couple out there that are interested in some of the behavioral health. There's also some with GI and others. But just to answer your question, yes, I mean, Big Pharma is paying attention. There's a lot of investments going into this from both the private equity venture side, but also pharma as they're dedicating resources to it.
Wonderful. We have 1 minute left. I apologize. This shows that you presented something very interesting to our audience. Who would like the jump ball to use up the last minute that we have left?
I'll just close out by saying it's been a delight to engage with all of you thought leaders across the industry. If you have any questions about Avia or who we serve, how we serve them, or even about the Avia marketplace that I described earlier, we'd love to keep this conversation going. So don't hesitate to connect with us on LinkedIn, go to our website to learn more. Mark, any closing thoughts?
Only to say that I think this is very exciting. This is genuinely very exciting. I appreciate your expertise, and you really did come at this from different angles. I think that this is going to look very different 5 years from now. There will be a great deal of activity. I think Antara is right. There will be, regulatory agencies will move forward and clarify some things. I just think it's a very exciting area, and congratulations to all of you for being early on leaders in all this. So thank you so much. I want to thank everyone. We just made it. We want to value the time of all of our audience, so we try to keep things to an hour. So this really concludes this presentation and this webinar for today. I want to thank all three of you, Antara, Amberly, and Sarah, and wish you all the very best. And please join us again in the future for another Healthcare Innovation webinar. This concludes today's presentation. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.